31 Cubans are dead, not from war, not from a hurricane, from hunger. And it all comes down to one word that two governments refuse to agree on. One word that is sitting between $8 billion and 11 million people going dark, going hungry, going without medicine. You need to hear this. My name is Jordan Vance. Every day, we break down the stories the headlines flatten into noise. Today, we are breaking down the Cuba standoff, and I promise you, by the end of this, you will understand something that almost no one covering this story has said out loud. Here is what you think this story is about. Cuba seized American properties in 1959. Homes, hotels, sugar plantations, oil refineries, Coca-Cola bottling plants, apartment buildings along the Malecón, nearly 6,000 separate claims. $8 billion in today's money. And now, 67 years later, Cuba is finally offering to pay. The Cuban government, a government that has resisted every American president since Eisenhower, has told the world it is prepared to negotiate a lump sum settlement. One payment, government to government. No individual lawsuits. No endless litigation. Just close the books. So why is no deal happening? Stay with me, because the answer will change how you understand not just Cuba, but every geopolitical standoff you will watch for the rest of your life. On April 18th, Cuba's Deputy Foreign Minister Carlos Fernandez Dosio made a formal statement. His government would discuss a lump sum compensation framework covering all certified American claims from the nationalization era. Not a new concept. Cuba settled with Britain, France, and Spain this exact way decades ago. Those deals worked. They closed. Money changed hands. History moved on. But Donald Trump is not asking for money. He is asking for a word, and that word is theft. Trump wants Cuba to formally acknowledge that the 1959 nationalizations were not sovereign acts of a revolutionary government. He wants them to call it what he calls it, state-sponsored robbery. Legal acknowledgement that the seizures were illegitimate, not just a check, a confession. And Cuba's answer? The same answer it has given every American administration for 67 years, is no. Think about what you just heard. $8 billion is on the table. Cuba is willing to pay it, and the deal is still collapsing. That gap between payment and admission is costing human lives right now, today, while you watch this. Here is the pressure behind this moment. On April 1st, Trump ordered a naval blockade. The USS Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group is positioned 90 miles north of Havana. 12 destroyers and cruisers seal the Straits of Florida. No commercial shipping has reached Cuban ports in 3 weeks. Not food, not fuel, not medicine. The Pentagon confirmed enforcement is absolute. Any vessel attempting to break the blockade will be turned back. Venezuela tried. A U.S. destroyer fired warning shots across its bow. The ships turned around. Cuba's economy was fragile before April 1st. Now it is in freefall. Fuel reserves have an estimated 10 to 12 days remaining. Hospitals are running on backup generators. Havana went dark for 6 hours on April 19, when the power grid failed. The United Nations reports food imports have stopped completely. The Pan American Health Organization declared a public health emergency on April 23rd, and the Cuban Health Ministry confirmed 31 deaths from malnutrition-related causes in the first 3 weeks of April. 31 people. Not statistics. People. Most of them were not alive in 1959. None of them seized a single property. But they are the ones paying the price for a negotiation between governments arguing about the legal vocabulary of a revolution that happened before their parents were born. Now let me show you the human side of what those $8 billion actually represent. Because this is the part the anchors skip. Maria Gonzalez was 11 years old when her family fled Cuba. Her father owned a textile factory. The family left their home in Miramar. Both were seized in 1960. She kept the property documents her entire life. Every folder, every deed, every photograph. She told reporters recently, "I never thought I would see this day, but I also never imagined we would have to accept it was legal to steal from us." Maria is now in her 70s. She has been waiting 67 years for a resolution. And right now, that resolution is within reach, stuck on a single word. Jorge Mascantos, chairman of the Cuban American National Foundation, sees it differently. "This is not about dollars," he said. "It is about justice. If we accept their money without their admission of wrongdoing, we validate the theft." Two Cuban exiles. Two completely opposite positions. Both of them morally coherent. Both of them right, depending on what you believe justice actually means. Marco Rubio weighed in on April 20th. "Any deal that does not restore property rights is a surrender to communist theft." Cuba's foreign ministry responded within hours. "Sovereignty is not negotiable. We will discuss fair compensation as a gesture of goodwill, but we will not allow the United States to dictate the legal basis of our revolution." Secretary of State Rubio, himself the son of Cuban exiles, presented a compromise formula on April 21st through Mexican intermediaries. Cuba pays the full $8 billion. The blockade lifts in phases. Both sides issue separate statements using their own characterization of 1959. No joint declaration, no agreed language, parallel narratives. Havana rejected it within hours. Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez responded in a televised address. "We will not participate in diplomatic theater where both sides pretend to agree while saying opposite things. Either there is mutual respect or there is nothing." Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum flew to Havana on April 16th and then to Washington on April 19th, trying to broker a path forward. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney called Trump directly on April 24th. $8 billion and an end to this crisis. That is a win. Take it. The European Union condemned the blockade as collective punishment. Russia and China called for UN Security Council action. The UN General Assembly is scheduled to vote on a resolution condemning the blockade on April 28th. It will almost certainly pass. Last year's vote was 187-2. Only the United States and Israel voted no. And none of it will change Trump's position. At a rally in Tampa on April 25th, he was direct. Cuba thinks they can starve their way to a better deal. They cannot. We hold all the cards. They will come around. Now here is what nobody is saying out loud, and this is the part I need you to stay for. Trump is not demanding the word theft because he cares about 67-year-old property law. He is demanding it because that word does something far more consequential than return $8 billion to American claimants. If Cuba formally declares that its 1959 nationalizations were theft, that they were crimes rather than sovereign acts, then every title, every deed, every piece of state property in Cuba built on the foundation of those nationalizations loses its legal basis. The entire legal architecture of the Cuban state collapses. Not through military force, through a word. Cuba understands this with perfect clarity. Accepting the money without the word costs Cuba $8 billion. Accepting the word costs Cuba everything. Its legal foundation, its institutional legitimacy, the basis on which its government has existed for 67 years. That is not stubbornness, that is survival. And here is a question that goes beyond Cuba entirely. If the United States successfully uses a naval blockade to force a sovereign government to delegitimize its own founding, what does that establish as precedent? Mexico nationalized foreign oil assets in 1938. Iran nationalized its oil industry in 1979. Venezuela nationalized American corporate holdings in the 2000s. Every government watching this standoff is watching the same thing. Whether economic coercion can be used to rewrite the legal history of a nation. The word theft applied to Cuba becomes a legal weapon available against all of them. This is not a Caribbean island story. This is a question about the architecture of international sovereignty. Here is what we know with certainty. Cuba offered $8 billion for property seized after 1959. Trump rejected it because Cuba will not call the seizures theft. The naval blockade has been in place for 19 days. 31 Cubans have died from malnutrition-related causes since April 1st. Hospitals are rationing medicine. The power grid is failing. Rubio's compromise, parallel statements, no joint language, was rejected by Havana. The UN vote will condemn the blockade and change nothing. Cuban exiles are divided between taking the money and demanding the word. Here is what we do not know. How many more people die while the word remains unsaid? Whether Trump holds the blockade indefinitely or Cuba breaks under its weight. Whether the $8 billion still on the table will still be there next month. Whether the only deal that was ever within reach closes before the window does. 11 million people are waiting in the dark right now. Not for troops, not for tanks, for two governments to decide whether one word is worth more than their lives. So here is a question I am leaving you with. Should Cuba say the word? If saying theft ends the blockade, saves lives, and unlocks $8 billion, is the word worth the cost? Or does saying it dissolve the legal foundation of the state and set a precedent that puts every government on earth in the crosshairs of American economic pressure? Cuban exiles and international law scholars will answer this completely differently. I want both answers in the comments. That debate is exactly what this story deserves. If this breakdown cut through something the daily headlines buried, the like button is how this analysis reaches the people arguing about it in Miami, in Havana, and in Washington, instead of getting buried by the algorithm. Share this with anyone who still thinks the Cuba standoff is about real estate. It never was. It was always about one word. And that word is worth more than $8 billion to both sides. If you want this level of analysis delivered to you every single day, not weekly, not occasionally, every day, subscribe. There is no obligation and no noise. Just the story beneath the story, broken down before anyone else does it. I will see you tomorrow.